So welcome everybody to this talk that we're putting on tonight with the wonderful Lucy Power. It's going to be about transactional analysis with teams. And so if you have ever kind of struggled to understand like the dynamics between teams, hopefully there's going to be some really brilliant insights in here today. I know Lucy because she runs the Therapeutic Coaching Academy, which is all about bringing skills to coaches so that they can work with people therapeutically. She's got a background and trained in transactional analysis and psychotherapy. And she also runs the Therapeutic Coaching Diploma, which I'm currently a student on, and it is an absolutely fantastic course. I'm learning so much good stuff there that I really wanted to kind of bring Lucy in so that she can share some of her amazing knowledge with you all. She also works with us at Brighter Work as well as one of our coaches. So if you've got any kind of questions about how you might want to work with us or work with Lucy, just give us a shout. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Lucy, and thank you very much to everybody for joining.
Oh, thank you, Gemma. I'm really glad to see you all here, and I'm really glad to be able to teach you this absolutely wonderful theory, and let's see together what we can do around bringing it into teams, bringing it into the teams that you can think of and consider that you've worked with before, or that you're working with now, or are causing you any strife or concern in your current work. Transactional analysis is an amazing theory for simplifying complicated things, which is something I've always been drawn to. I spent a great part of my career being a social worker for people with learning difficulties and mental health issues, and a large part of that was about around making things that were complicated or inaccessible easier for people to get hold of and make sense of. So in teaching transactional analysis, I'm in my absolute joy because I'm making something that is relatively easy, diagrammable, observable, easy to access for as many people as I can possibly reach. That is the mission I'm on. So I'm really delighted to be here, and I'm going to share my screen and without any more ado, get cracking. So we're exploring using transactional analysis with teams, and I chose to talk about teams specifically rather than organizations, because I see those as two slightly different things. Organizational transactional analysis is something that we can qualify in as a certified transactional analyst, and I've chosen not to do that. I went the psychotherapy route, but using transactional analysis with teams, it helps us to start off by looking at the kind of transactional analysis that I learned in training in transactional analysis psychotherapy, as in individual transactional analysis. So we're looking at one human being, how they're made, what the structure of their personality is, what the function of the different parts of their personality is, and what happens when that one person meets another one person or a range of other people, and what happens then in the space between them and the other, whether that other is a team or a group, or whether that other is another individual, and what can go wrong, and what can get messy, and what can get really difficult, and how that difficulty can grow and build and snowball to the point where we need to do something about it. So we're going to be exploring that today, and if you have any questions, pop them in the chat and I will attend to them every now and again, or I'll take a pause and look at the chat just to check whether there's anything that feels pertinent and important to answer before we go on with anything else. So what is transactional analysis? I like this little drawing here. Is a messy-headed person holding hands with a nice and neat and tidy-headed person. And the nice, neat, tidy-headed person in this analogous drawing is supposed to represent somebody who understands the cleanliness and simplicity and the say what you mean and mean what you say-ness that transactional analysis can represent. So it's a psychological approach. It was founded by Eric Berne in the 1950s, 1960s, which is when he did most of his writing and research and observation, and more writing and more research and more observation and a lot of writing. He basically lived in a shed down the end of his garden and did a lot of writing. He wrote papers for journals and he wrote lots of books. And you probably have heard of Games People Play. You probably also have heard of I'm Okay, You're Okay, which isn't by Eric Berne, it's by Thomas Harris, but he was a student of Eric Berne's. You may have also heard of Claude Steiner, who wrote Scripts People Live, and he was a friend and a student of Eric Berne's as well, and did a lot of work on helping us to understand the stories we tell ourselves about who we are and how we carry that story and argue for its truth and validity as we walk through our lives. And we're going to look at later in this session what happens when different people with different life scripts meet each other, and how they fit and how they don't fit, and what happens to how they get their needs met in a team, in a space together. So it's a psychology. It was born in the 1950s. So it was based on Eric Berne's observations of the world as it was then, and it's been massively updated, continuously refined, and it's really evidence-based and truly based on observation of how the world is in the here and now, as well as how it was in the 1950s. So it's often something that when I'm teaching this, and I do teach this a lot, it's often something that's brought to my attention, but it's an archaic psychology. Most of the books are written in the 1950s, they're not. There are loads of psychology and loads of transactional analysis books written in the here and now. One of the ones recently that I can recommend is by Anna de Graaf, who edited it, and a lot of other transactional analysts have contributed towards it. It's kind of a collection of essays, and it's called Into TA. And it's a big pink hardback book that's beautiful to look at. And it's got some really good modern twists on the theory, modern takes on how to apply it into a range of different settings. So it talks about psychotherapy, of course, because transactional analysis was born in psychotherapy, but now it's spread its application into organizations and groups, education, ecology, and counselling. And it's reached, and I've brought it into coaching, because it's so important that we integrate coaching with a psychological depth from whatever school of thought or whatever stable we need to integrate it from. But I can see so many beautiful ways that transactional analysis works really well with coaching, whether we're coaching in teams or whether we're coaching individually. So I'm going to now dive into a bit more of the detail of transactional analysis. That's like a super overview. I think one thing that is important to mention, I think, at this stage, is that when Eric Berne started applying transactional analysis into helping people to be more of who they truly are, which was what was important to him, he started to do that in groups, in teams. He would pull a group of people together and help them to work together so that their eyes were on each other, their feedback was for each other, and the process of the whole group was accounted for in and for and with each individual, which is what's really helpful about transactional analysis. It was born of working psychotherapeutically, sure, but certainly in groups, in teams, in a collection of individuals. Excuse my coughing, I'm recovering from a cold. Lemsip. So how can transactional analysis help teams? Well, it can help teams to look at each other for what is true and real. It can help to give teams a language with which they can talk to each other and to anybody else outside of the team to get help with things that feel tricky and complex. It gives parameters, because there are a lot of diagrams in transactional analysis, and a lot of simple terms that describe parts of ourselves and parts of the stuff that happens between ourselves and other people. So it gives a language, and it also gives observable descriptors to things that are happening in us, in the people around us, and in the space between us. So transactional analysis helps teams by clarifying what's really going on here and by giving us a way to talk about that. Because when we talk about things, we can change them, we can make them better. So it's such an empowering psychological approach in that it helps us to make a step toward making things better, to calling things in, and to discussing things with a depth of understanding and a resonance with what's real and what's true. And of course, always where we need it to be, what we want it to be. And this evening, isn't it? I was like, is it this afternoon? You're going to find some tools and some things that you can do to shift any complex and difficult and tricky dynamics into a safer, cleaner, clearer way of being together. So I'm going to whiz you through the core pieces of transactional analysis. So, and the first part of that is the foundational principles. We're also going to look at ego states, transactions, life script, and autonomy, which is the North Star in transactional analysis. It's where we need to get to be free of that story that's held us trapped all of our lives, and that we bring into our workplaces, we bring into the teams that we work in, and that we can step out of once we know how to. And we can also step out of the psychological games that keep that life script in place. So the 3 foundational principles of transactional analysis are: we're all okay. And I'm saying that like, oh, phew, we're all okay. It's not quite as easy as announcing that we're all okay and therefore we're all okay. Because in transactional analysis terms, okayness doesn't mean I haven't got any problems. It doesn't mean I'm quite well, thank you. It doesn't mean I'm managing, I'm getting through it. It doesn't mean those things. And it's so often misinterpreted as meaning those things. So as I mentioned earlier, it was Tom Harris that wrote the book, I'm okay, you're okay, which is, it just means this, we're all okay. And, you know, in that book, obviously, he describes it in great detail, the process of okayness, the meaning of okayness. And it's still really difficult to decipher. What I get from okayness, the concept of okayness, is that underneath the layers and layers and layers and layers and layers and layers of defensive mechanisms inside us, the ways that we learned to think and feel and behave that aren't quite us, they're not really us, but ways of being that we appropriated, that we learned how to put on, a bit like wearing a mask, a bit like wearing dress-up clothes. Underneath all of those is our core self. Our core self is like the center of an onion. You know, there's the bit in there, let's say it's sweeter than the rest of the onion, half idea that it is. And then there's layers and layers and layers and layers and layers and layers of onion around it. So once we peel all those away, inside the core of the onion is the nub of okayness. And Eric Burns said, we're all born princes, and the civilizing process makes us frogs. And that's a reference to The Princess and the Frog, the story about the lonely, hard done by princess who's wandering around the palace grounds looking for something to do, something to occupy her. She thinks she's very bored. And she comes across a beautiful pond and takes to sitting by this pond day in, day out, to seek solace, to seek peace, to find somewhere to be, somewhere to belong. And slowly and surely, she meets and gets to know a frog. This is a fairy tale, remember? She gets to know a frog. And they talk. Her and the frog have a nice chat. He's a very entertaining frog. He's a very interesting, clever, well-read frog. And they get to know each other. And in time, she falls in love with him. And she gives him a kiss. She raises him to her lips and gives him a true love's kiss. And the second that kiss lands upon the frog's lips, he magics himself back into the prince he was before a wicked witch came and put a spell on him with her wand and magicked him into a frog because he'd done a perceived wrong deed against her. So she made him a frog. And what Richard Byrne says is that in our lives, the process of learning how to do as we're told, the process of growing up in a world that doesn't quite fit us, or in a world where difficult, hard things happen, even if the most difficult and the hardest thing that's ever happened is being told to turn the telly off, or being told that you're not allowed to go out late tonight, or being told that it's bedtime, even if that's the worst thing, we twist ourselves slightly or largely out of shape in order to fit in and comply with the wishes of the big people around us who are raising us. And in that process, we lose touch with our okayness. We forget that we're okay, and we forget how to attach to our okayness. We forget how to be okay. And so this stands as a reminder for us all. We are all okay. And we've forgotten that we're okay. And we use this twisted out of shape way of being, this behaving ourselves or rebelling way of being, to attempt to get back in touch with that okayness. It doesn't always work. So we're all okay is the first foundational principle. The second is we can all think. I didn't really get this one for years when I was learning transactional analysis. I was like, of course we can. And some people always raise their hands and say, what about people with learning difficulties? What about people who are neurodivergent? Well, we can all think. We all think differently. I mean, we literally all do think differently. And maybe some people with a neurobiological difference think really differently to the way that you or I do. And we can all think. And this, when it finally landed on me, it really did let me off a hook, because I'm a coach and I've been a psychotherapist, and I've been a social worker as well. And I realized that I've been doing people's thinking for them sometimes. Like, I know what you can do about that terrible problem you've got. Why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? Why don't you do the other? And we've all been guilty of that. We've all given people advice when they haven't asked for it. We've all given unsolicited support, help, advice, and all of that. But knowing that we can all think, knowing that they can think as well as we can think, reduces our need to do people's thinking for them. So I really like this one. In the end, it took me a few years. We all choose our fate, and we can change our minds at any time. This is magical to me. It was the sense of this, that we can change our minds, that led me to be a social worker in the first place and started me on this career of helping people to be more of themselves, to be closer to the truth of their core self, closer to their okayness. And we all choose our fate means that we choose how our life's going to go. And we've all heard of the formative years, right? So all psychologists say that before we're the age of 7 or 8, we've built a congruent, full world picture of how the world is. You know, we've deciphered the laws of physics, and we've deciphered the way the world works for us. We've decided who we are and how we're going to show up into that world. And we've decided what our relationship's going to be like with the world, like whether we're going to be winners or losers, whether we're going to be rich or poor, whether we're going to be loved or not loved, whether we're going to be popular or not popular. We've decided all of that stuff by the age of 8. And I know that that sounds bonkers the first time you've ever heard it, but it is the case. It is true. Shakespeare knew this. He said, "Show me the boy and I'll show you the man." And yeah, it is the case. But that's not okay. You've set yourself a trajectory and it's too late to do anything about it. So the second half of this statement says, we can change our minds at any time. I think that's the part that everybody forgets, that we can change our minds at any time. We can re-decide our way of being in the world, our habits, our habitualized ways of thinking and feeling and behaving. We can change our minds at any time. So let's relate this to working with teams. How do those 3 statements relate to teams? I'm going to stop the share and invite you to comment or pop something in the chat that speaks to how you think we can relate this to teams. We're all okay. Deep down, sometimes that okayness is barely decipherable under the layers of the ways we think, feel, and behave. So we're all okay. How can we relate that to our work with teams? And we can all think, how can we relate that to our work with teams? And knowing that we all choose our fate and that we can change our minds at any time, how does that relate to teams? I'd love to know your thoughts.
I'm happy to share first because you've probably got a bit of silence going on there. So I think for me, thinking about everybody is okay, that's speaking to people's nature. So to me, that resonates with the idea that people are inherently good and everybody tries their best, at least most of the time. That's something to bear in mind when things don't always go as well, or perhaps sometimes conflicts or things arise. Reflecting on the intent where people come from is a good place to be. I think one of the things that I have also struggled with is often feeling like I'm helping by suggesting things. So trying to think about, taking more of that coach stance and getting people to come up with their ideas and supporting and guiding their own ideas and unlocking their thought process is more of a helpful thing when working with individuals and teams. And then in terms of people, being able to change their path and craft their fate, again, it's about working with them to understand what does their journey look like, how can we support in that sphere, and that's going to look really different for each person. So how can we kind of harness and unlock people's potential that's right for them, that ultimately is going to generate the best results, the most engaged people in a team. So that's what I took away from it.
Thank you, Sian. That's great, beautiful stuff. I've had some comments. Just because a team started one way, if they want to change, they can. I love that too. Less judgment, less telling, more openness. We can start our conversations with teams from a place of curiosity instead of assuming they need us to be fixed. Absolutely. It used to be a habit of mine as a coach to say, how can I help you? What do you need from me? How can I best support you? And then suddenly I had this wake-up moment and thought, maybe I'm not the person they need to help them. Just because I'm their coach doesn't mean they need me or the resources that I have in this moment to help them. Because especially when we're working with teams, that team has so many resources in it, right? So what do you need and who is the best person to help you for this? Or what resources don't you have in yourself that you could get from somewhere else is a really good coach style question to ask. Emily says, sorry, my connection's a bit patchy. Otherwise I'd unmute. Oh, that's a shame. But I think there are often instances where we've had things go wrong with people in the past, and now we think you're not okay. And I mean that in a we don't think like each other manner, not bullying or meanness. Yeah, I get that. So we're falling down as teams in that first principle, because we've assumed that how another person will contribute is part of that team. Sure. Yeah, there are different life positions, and they're the only healthy one is I'm okay and you're okay, so we are all okay. But there's also I'm okay, but you're not okay. And there's also I'm not okay, but you're okay, and it's all right for you. That's what that sparks. And there's, of course, the I'm not okay and you're not okay, which is just hopeless. So we've got paranoid of I'm okay, but those other ones, they're not okay. And you might see these manifesting, showing up in the teams that you're working with. I'm not okay, you're okay. I'm okay, but you're not okay. And none of us are okay. I've certainly worked with many teams where the I'm not okay and they're not okay has been in place, and that's been supported, that viewpoint, that stance, that worldview has been supported within that team. So a first step would be to encourage everyone to remember that they're okay and that everybody else is too.
Yeah, so your question was also how to use it with teams. And another thing I thought about on both the we're all okay, but also everyone can think, is bringing that in the start of a session or even the start of a team contract, just bringing that, lifting that out. Even though people don't hold that, you can then bring it back and say, okay, so how are we with this? We are all okay. And so it's more like using that as a signpost towards if there is behavior that might be people not showing up like equals, for instance, and I'm okay, you're not okay, showing up in that fashion. So it could signpost it back to the alliance. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that, John Inge. And you used the word equals, and we're all equals in our okayness. And when we take a different life position, so like I'm okay, but you're not okay, or I'm not okay, you're okay, we're placing ourselves and others on an unequal footing. And we call it in transactional analysis, the language that we use is one up position and one down position. And the only two that are equal are none of us are okay, which cannot be true. It may be that our circumstances are not okay. It may be that our feelings, we're not feeling okay, or that our thinking is so bogged down with this terrible thing that's happening in our organization or in our world that we're not thinking in an okay way. But underneath the layers of thinking, feeling, and behaving, we can find our okayness. And when we reach each other from okayness to okayness, communication gets a hell of a lot easier. So thank you for that. I appreciate that contribution. Anything else? Got another comment. Pete says psychological safety is important to be able to be open and transparent. Many team members will say then they are okay, even if they aren't, to fit in and not be a problem. Oh, that's so true. And that use of the word okay is the common or garden use of the word okay, and it's from the twisted out of shape place, from the froggy place. No, I'm okay, I'm fine. I'm crossing my arms as I say that, but that's the body language that goes with it, isn't it? I'm okay. Yeah. And then they go and cry in the toilet because they're not okay. They're not feeling good at all. But they're masquerading as if they are, so as not to be a problem. Yeah, that's a great point. So working with teams with these three foundational principles is about creating that psychological safety and fostering an atmosphere, a weather system, a culture that gives people permission to actually share their truth, their real, their authenticity, because that's the thing that's going to get them safe to reveal, this is me tossing off the layers and layers, to reveal their actual core and okay self. And from that place, we give our best. From that place, we give our truth. And we work better. We do the best that we've got to bring. We bring our whole self. Okay, I'm going to share my screen again now. So I want to introduce you, I'm sure you've been introduced to these already, to ego states. So Eric Berne came up with this model, the ego state model, and it's really, it's the identity of transactional analysis. It's his brand mark as well. It is a branded mark. Nobody's allowed to use this in their branding unless they're a certified transactional analyst, apparently. So he said that we all have 3 ego states: parent, adult, and child. And he also said that the parent ego state is split into 2: critical or controlling parent and nurturing parent. So we've got the, you're not going out dressed like that, are you? And we've got the, oh, darling, do text me when you get there, otherwise I will worry. And did you see how I acted when I was saying both of those things? They're really observable. And this is what Eric Berne massively emphasized when he brought this model out. You can see it happening. You can see and feel, and you can observe the tone, the cadence, the way of holding the body, and what is said when somebody's in their parent ego state and when they're in their child ego state, which is also split into 2: adapted child and free child. So free child is like, there are no rules at all. There's no rules. And if they are, definitely don't apply to me. And the adapted child is full of the rules and is either going to rebel against them or comply with them. So the parent, adult, child model tells us that we're in one or the other of these ego states at any given moment. And we can flip quite fast from one to the other, but usually we can observe them and say they're in their parent ego state now. And outside of our own awareness, we get alert to what ego state somebody else is in. And often also outside of our awareness, we're invited into a complementary ego state, one that goes well with it, one that fits with it. So in the parent, when our energy's in our parent ego state, we think, feel, and behave like the big, significant, impactful people did around us when we were little. It's like we've taken video footage of them and then we store it somewhere in ourselves. And when our energy is in our parent ego state, it's like we press play, we reenact those recordings from back then. So when I say to the 7-year-old I live with, have you cleaned your bedroom? I mean, look at that look on my face and the fact that my arms are on my hips. That's exactly what my mother used to say to me, and exactly how she'd say it and how she would cock her head and pull that face. And so I will think, feel, and behave like my mum, my dad, my gran, aunties, uncles, the lady from the shop, the teacher I remember from school. And this is mostly outside of our awareness that this happens. We don't say, usually, right, this calls for me going in my parent ego state, off I go. It's an outside of an awareness thing that we do. And when we know what we're looking for, we can really see it. So when you observe somebody in their parent ego state, they might wag a finger. They might put their hands on their hips. They might lean forward. They might shake their head in that must be from one of the big people in my life, because I do that quite a bit when I'm in my parent ego state. So there are ways of acting and there are ways of thinking as well. I remember I was in a group meeting, I can't remember where I was, and it was in an in-person group, and every single person was on their phones. And I remember thinking something like, wow, everyone's on their phones. And it was something then came in, and I realized that I was going into my parent ego state. It was like I was edging into it. It was like, is this what the world has come to? Is this it now? And I realized in that, okay, I was being judgmental. I was being critical. I was in my critical parent ego state. So I was thinking, feeling and behaving like a big person used to when I was little. I think it was my mum and my nana. Not that mobile phones were a thing when I was little and observing them and recording this, but that's definitely how they would have reacted and how my mother does react now. So our parent ego state is full of recordings of big people from when we were little. It's also full of the cultural laws, the ways of being that we learn incidentally from being in a specific culture, in a society, in a faith group, in a specific family, in a country, in a geographical, culturally laden space in the world. Our parent ego state has all the rules around gender, all the things that impact the way we are. Like, for example, if we were in person, I would either be stood up and pacing around on a stage or in front of you or something. But if I was sitting down and giving this talk, I would have my legs crossed like that. I just would do that because there's something in me that says that's the right thing to do. It's how I should behave in public, because I'm a cis woman. I grew up learning how to do that in public, and it's not particularly comfortable either. So as I'm not in person, I'm sat here with my legs wide open. So just know that is what people do when no one's looking. And there are so many rules about, I mean, I grew up knowing that if I have a snotty nose, which I do have when I'm not using Lemsip at the moment, you blow your nose into a tissue, scrunch the tissue up, and put it somewhere away from other people because it's got germs in it. And I know that in other cultures, they don't do that. It's disgusting to them. So the cultural parent sits in the parent ego state. So all the rules, all the do's and don'ts and shoulds and shouldn'ts and oughts nots and not here, not there. There's rules about hats in church and giving your seat to people on public transport. There's rules that we follow, looking both ways before you cross the road, cleaning your teeth in the morning, brushing your hair 100 times, all those kind of things that we're raised with that sometimes we don't question. It's as if they are the laws of physics, as if they're non-negotiable, but they are negotiable, and you get to choose. You get to choose between them. So then we have our adult ego state. This is the one where the most powerful iteration of self is, because the adult ego state only accesses the here and now. It accesses this present moment. And the adult ego state, in being present in the here and now, thinks, feels, and behaves exclusively in response to what's actually happening. Not what should be happening, or not how you should react when this is happening, but just to what's happening from the state of being that you're in. So it's the most authentic way of being. And classical transactional analysts believe that the best and only way to be is in purely your adult ego state. I disagree insofar as I like the idea of an integrating adult ego state. So putting your adult ego state in charge, but absolutely having the strengths of your parent ego state, because your parent ego state tells you to dress weather appropriately and to make sure you're nice and neat and tidy or look fabulous or whatever your parent ego state dictates to you to do. And your child ego state is playful and creative and reaching for joy in the free child part of it. So in the child ego state, you think, feel and behave as you did when you were younger. So you think and feel and behave as you did in a previous way of being. And because those 8 formative years are really predominant in the formation of your personality, it's often that you go back to 8 and before when you're in your child ego state. So thinking, feeling and behaving as you did when you were 8 or younger is how we are in the child ego state. And we're going to explore later how the child ego state is invited into teamwork and how the parent ego state is invited into teamwork as well. So a reminder, parent ego state, when you're energizing your parent ego state, or when you're in your parent ego state, you're thinking, feeling and behaving as the big people did when you were little. It's like you've taken one of those recordings that you took, press play, and you have left the room, and the recording is playing out through your body, through out of your mouth, in your body language, like you're thinking, feeling and behaving just as those big people did, or one of them, or the other of them, or all of them if they all behaved similarly when you were little. So what you have in your the content you have in your parent ego state is content that the child you placed in there when you were actually young. Not your child ego state, but you as a young person placed into your parent ego state. So some of my parent ego state is a bit sepia tinted, and so when I think, feel and behave like my dad did, I'm probably much nicer than he actually was. And when I think, feel and behave as my mum did, I'm probably meaner and more bossy and telly-offy than she really was. But there was a tint because I was a child and that was my experience back then. So when you're being really mean, which person from your childhood, which cast member from your childhood are you appropriating the thinking, feeling and behaving of? And the adult ego state, in that place, when you're thinking, feeling and behaving from your adult ego state, you are thinking, feeling and behaving in response to the here and now, in response to reality. And when you're in your child ego state, you're thinking, feeling and behaving as you did when you were younger, when you were little, when you were a kid. Okay, so let's relate this to working with teams. How do you think this, knowing this about ego states, will impact your work with teams? How do you think this will, what light does this shed on your working with teams? You can stick it in a comment or you can unmute and speak it out. I'm just going to answer, there's a question in here. What were those FCAP, etc. states? So the parent ego state is split into critical or controlling, that's CP, parent, and nurturing parent. And the child ego state is split into adapted and free child. Yeah, thank you for answering that, Emily. Great answer, Maria. Maria said that additional granularity to recognize teams and pairs and dynamics. And Rich says we work in creative jobs and we sometimes forget how to bring in a creative state. Oh, feels like a lot of the serious play stuff is building from this. Yeah, serious play is great. When you have a integrating adult ego state, you can say, right, I'm in my adult ego state. I can see we have a need for greater creativity. Let's play. Yeah, I love that. Teams where some people are command and control mode. Oh, yes. And they tell you what to do and they come across as parent ego state. Sounds very much like they would be. You might respond in parent mode, you can't tell me what to do, or child ego state, rebel or reluctant doing. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, we're going to get into that, the impact of each other's ego states on each other in a sec as well. Recognizing, this is John Inger, recognizing that from parent, we might look at rules for the rule's sake instead of how they help us. Yeah, the parent ego state loves a rule. Thank you.
I think one that seems like it might be helpful from the nurturing parent thing is maybe like the need to protect others. I've seen that where I've inadvertently thought that I'm helping people by like being the voice and championing and trying to solve like problems and deal with like conflict on behalf of others. And actually it was on Simon Power's course, because I've been on that recently, where he was talking about the drama triangle, and I realized that I was inadvertently continuing some of those negative interactions because I was perpetuating that cycle between victim and perpetrator by playing a part in that. So sometimes I think you can really think that you're helping people by supporting or championing their cause, but actually you're maybe not doing what is as useful as you think you are. So that was a big learning for me recently.
I hear you. I've been through that learning myself as well. I think a lot of us are raised and praised to think that putting other people's needs above our own, sure, but also championing their needs and stepping in to rescue is the right thing to do. And actually what we're doing there is an I'm okay, you're not okay thing, where we're assuming that they need us because we've got all the resources and we're the white knight in shining armor, and they haven't got any resources. And it's far too simplistic, isn't it? It's simplistic childlike thinking in that space of I'm going to step in, I'm going to rescue this person and champion their needs. Whereas actually they've got resources. We just need to help them sometimes to find them in themselves. Yeah, it can be, Nick. Nick says, I've been thinking about nurturing parent too. Can it be disempowering for teams? Yeah, for sure. Because, I mean, we'll get onto transactions in a sec. When we're in either parent substate, when we're in a parent place, we invite others into a child place. Frankie says, rules are good for you, not for me, just for you. Great. Yeah, so we're all agreed. I was just thinking about the white knight syndrome that Lucy just alluded to. Yeah. It's okay. It's all right. I'm here now. It's okay. Everybody can just relax because I'm here to sort it all out. John Inger said, in child, we might not remember that we can all think. Only the grown-ups. Absolutely. That's such a good spot. Teams might wait for others to do things for them. Yeah, so it creates passivity, right? Maru?
Yeah, thank you. I didn't want to write it in the chat because I'm on my phone. It just has a crappy keyboard. Puts me in a nasty parent state. I wanted to ask, one of the things I always wondered about TA is the combination with systems, or systemic perspective on organizations and teams. There's many things. I know it comes from primary therapy, but I also know there is a part of the ITAA that deals specifically with organizations. There is a program called O-ITAA, I guess, and it's I was always wondering, how does it work? I mean, how can I wrap my head around, using something deeply personal, deeply related to childhood and so many things, and an organization, a system, let's say a team with leadership and other members that can trigger me by trying to be bossy around me. And it just, because of my upbringing, I just get triggered every day and I overreact,
So what we're doing now in this session is we're using the individual TA to explore how we can work with teams, because we're counting the the individual processes that each person in a team brings and has inside them, and how they're triggered and how they're contributing and what they're inviting and what invitations they might be receiving from other members of the team. When we look at organizational TA, we're looking more similarly to systems and constellations and family systems work. We're looking more at the overview, the impact, and we're looking at the organization as a one thing, rather than, obviously, the definition in organizational TA, which I did a year of, is it's a collection of individuals. So there's a slightly different leaning in organizational TA, and it's about there's a massive accounting of the organization as a one thing. So an organization has ego states, has a life script, it plays psychological games, it has a life position, and recognizing that and recognizing the attraction into that for each individual, and then how each individual's life script plays out within that organization in order to maintain and continue with the same things, but contribute to and maintain the organization's position as a one thing. Does that make sense? Because I'm teaching from psychotherapeutic transactional analysis, like individual one person and their impact on other people and other people's impact on that one person at the moment. But organizational TA is different because it's much more about group process and how that impacts the organization as a whole. It holds the organization as separate while also being comprised of the individuals that are part of the organization.
Yeah, totally. That's exactly what systems thinking is. Looking at the whole and the sub holes and all the parts. But I was thinking, wondering. It's just, I guess there's no way around it, but just get in the journey, because I know from my TA instructor it takes 6 years to become an IATAA.
Yeah, yeah. It depends what route you take. So I'd done psychotherapy first and then did a bit of organizational. You can do it in 5. That's what I'm giving you hope. You can do it in 5. It's still long. Thank you for that question. It's good. Okay. Anything else? Share my screen again. Okay, so transactions are what happens when my ego states meet your ego states. And also, to respond to that last question, what happens when my ego states meet an organization or a mass, like a crowd that represents a one thing. So we have complementary transactions, which can go all of these ways, which are always diagrammed with parallel lines because they go back and forth. They support each other, go back and forth. And they're called complementary, not because they're giving compliments, but because they complement each other. This is the best place to get people to when we're working with teams. Be in our adult ego state, speak to their adult ego state, because of course then, as you can see from the direction of arrows here, I speak to your adult ego state, you will be invited, be called upon, be requested to join me there and speak back to me from your adult ego state. And same with all the others. And this, sadly, is the most common. This was the first transaction that Eric Byrne noticed. And he's also noticed it's the most common in many, many, many interactions across the world. Somebody starts out in their parent ego state and gives an invitation to the other person's child ego state, who willingly accepts and comes back from their child ego state into the other person's parent ego state. So that could look like at work, in a team. Have you done that report for me yet? And the child ego state might be invited, triggered, whichever word we choose to use, into their child ego state. Haven't done it yet. I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry. Will you give me a bit more time? Oh, no, really sorry. Or they might rebel. No, haven't. Yeah, I might do it today. I might do it today. I was so becoming a teenager then, because our child ego state isn't only 0 to 8. We can have a teenage part in there too. Often my rebellious child, when I'm in that, the strongest part of rebellion for me, for some reason, and I've not quite got hold of this, is when I'm 11 to 12. Maybe it's just that's when puberty kicked in. But I'm like very like, what? I can't believe you even asking me that. So this is the most common. It can, of course, the complementary transaction can start with child requesting that the other person goes into their parent ego state. So will you show me how to do this again? Because I know you've already shown me how to do it, but I've forgotten. Sorry. I'm aware also that both of my enactments of the child ego state there apologise. It doesn't have to be an apologetic state. I think that says more about me and where my child ego state is. So this one is the one that we most commonly see at work, sadly. And ulterior transactions. So complementary transactions, notice that they're all from one ego state inviting another ego state into play. And then ulterior transactions. So this is when there's a social message that can be overheard, can be observed, can be seen by anybody else. So we've got here this social transaction that you see here with the clear, with the unbroken lines, are the social transaction from adult to adult. So that might look like, hey, have you done that report for me yet? I haven't quite finished it and I will get it back to you by the end of today. So that is an exchange of facts in response to the question. It's an exchange of facts and it feels very emotionally regulated, grounded. And if I was walking past you having that conversation with somebody else in a corridor at work, I'd just be like, oh, boring, they're just talking about a report. Nothing would land with me, nothing. I wouldn't think something kicking off there. But you will. In this conversation, you will feel this psychological transaction. And that's the broken line one. So this is when what is said isn't meant and what is meant isn't said. An ulterior transaction are where there's a hidden agenda that both parties in the transaction, in the conversation, feel, experience bodily, and they respond to that in their ulterior. So there's a hidden message both ways. And it may be that the have you finished that report yet wasn't given as an ulterior transaction, but the no, but I'll have it with you by the end of the day was. And then when I say, thank you, please make sure it is, you'll know that I'm in it with you and that we're both having an ulterior conversation, one that's hidden but definitely known about. So what could be really happening was, now then you're lazy layabout, nearly almost ready for the chopping block bugger. I bet you've not done that report, have you? That could be the really what was going on for me, but I dressed it as, have you done that report yet? And your response could be, oh, you tyrant. Oh my God, I can't believe you're chasing me for it. You always chase me for everything. I'm so sick to death of you. I'm going back to my office now to look for another job. That could be what's really going on. I'd never know that from observing it. You will only know that from participating in this kind of transaction. So that's an ulterior transaction. And I just want to bring in psychological games, because psychological games are an ongoing series of complementary ulterior transactions progressing into a well-defined, predictable outcome. And you know, the outcome is where you're like, what? How did we get here again? Why have you just stormed off? Oh my goodness, this always happens. I'm so sick of this. It's that kind of ending, and a bit typical. And it will confirm the end of a psychological game. It will always confirm your life script. Typical. Can't trust anybody. Typical. No one ever trusts me. Typical. No one ever says what they actually mean. Typical. This place has gone to the dogs. So, an ongoing series of complementary, this is, see the complementary because the lines are parallel, ulterior transactions. So when we don't say what we mean, and when we don't mean what we say, we can end up in psychological games. And psychological games are so messy. And once they've started, you can't stop them. You have to run them through to the very end. And in psychological games, nothing but unhealth comes out of them. And support for staying locked inside your life script. This is the way out of a ulterior transaction or a psychological game, and that is to cross the transaction. So if I was to say to you, I bet you haven't got that report done, have you? And clearly I'm in my parent ego state, because I've got my arms folded and I'm a bit eye-rolly and a bit doing this my mother shaky head thing. It's going to invite you really strongly. Like, the invite is like a gut pull. It's going to invite you into your child ego state. And if you can just keep yourself together, get into your adult ego state, know that you're in your adult state, feel grounded, know that you're present and calm and emotionally regulated and here and now, and say, hey, I can see you don't think I'm going to be able to pull this one off, but yeah, I'm nearly at the end. I just need to proofread it and I'll have it with you by probably about an hour. Is that all right? And you're in your adult ego state and you've spoken to mine. And that's going to invite me straight back into my adult ego state. And I'm going to say, hey, thank you. You're right. I definitely have issues around trusting that these things are going to happen when I need them to, but thank you. And yeah, having it in about an hour would be great, because I need to give it to my boss in about 2. It'll give me a chance to proofread it too. So that just takes the heat out of it. You getting in your adult ego state and inviting me into mine takes the heat out of it. So let's think about how we can use our knowledge of transactions with teams. What are you thinking? How can it help? How can you help to bring calm and peace and grounded, mindful presence into a team by using or knowing about transactions?
The one thing that I was just thinking about as you were talking about moving into the adult from like parent-child was I recently listened to the Blinkist on the chimp paradox. And so talking about like that emotional brain versus the rational brain. And I think that really resonates to what you were saying. So even if someone, you know, talks to you or gives you certain feedback, you kind of have to pass that through. Like, your emotional reaction immediately might be, oh, how dare you talk to me like that? Why is this happening? But if you can kind of pass it through that emotional brain and into the rational, so into that adult state, I suppose, then I guess despite how someone's interacted with you, you can come from that adult place. But I think we have to acknowledge that an emotional response to someone speaking to us in a particular manner that does not feel good is normal, and we still need to think about how we can respond Much easier said than done, but it was just something else that kind of I thought about as you'd.
It's a really good point. And I think the chimp paradox is inspired by transactional analysis. Like one of the guys that came up with it, not the one that wrote the book, but the other one. It was two guys who came up to it together. They taught on my coach qualification that I did back in 2016, and all the way through that, because I was already learning transactional analysis when I did that, I was like, a second, this is TA. But at that point, I was seeing it everywhere because I was consumed with TA. It's how it's how it works. It's insidious. But yeah, you're absolutely right. And different ego states hold different levels of emotion and different resonances for us, and different places where we can get triggered or invited into a different part of our lived experience. So for sure. And getting into your adult ego state is the way.
Just wanted to, something that just came to mind was that a lot of it seems to be quite related to hierarchy. So if you're seen as a leader or seen as higher up, then you're probably more likely to take a parent ego state, for example, and almost talk down to people. Maybe removing hierarchy, having a bit more of a flat structure and being more of a we are a team in this together would be a way of influencing the way people communicate with each other.
Thank you for that. I used to strongly hold that a presupposition that anyone who held power over me was automatically in a parental position toward me, and therefore invited my presence in child ego state. It's not always the case. And I'm hearing you relating it to there being a danger in hierarchy for the ones at the top of the organogram to be in their parent ego states, or to be more likely able to inhabit that than ones on the lower rungs of the hierarchy. It isn't always the case. And in the interpersonal space, it can go anyway. It doesn't have to be the person who holds more power and authority that gets into parent, although there is, I think there is a link, but it's one of those, it ain't necessarily so. And I'm curious about how a flatter structure would impact the showing up of the parent and the child ego states within a team, for sure. But it's also a leadership style, isn't it? Paternalism, or that kind of thing. There's a way that organizations can just be in and of themselves, where the organization either takes care of its employees or punishes them until they do their work right. There is definitely that, for sure. Thank you for that. Pete said, interestingly, I had an ex-manager who once told me that he gained confidence to manage people at work after becoming a parent. It's amazing.
Yeah, that was me.
Yeah.
It kind of probably came from a little bit
there.
from that. Yeah, it was almost like since becoming a parent, it was like, well, I've learned how to now manage people who I see as kind of below me, and it changed the way he acted around people. I just thought it was very, I've always remembered it. It was a very interesting comment.
It really is, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think there are so many parallels between parenting and managing, and whether there should be or not, whether it's healthy or not, it's open for some kind of debate or some exploration, for sure. Emily has to leave, but that bit was a real light bulb for me. Currently stuck in complementary or tiered transactions. Oh no. Easy for you to say. Thank you so much for organising, and the topic was so well presented. Thank you. Just being aware and mindful of those ego states will help me identify. And yeah, I do meditation quite regularly. I'm now realising that it could be helping to get me into adult mode. Yeah, because it's about being present, isn't it, Nick? Maria said, taking the time to respond and choose the state, taking that pause. It's Viktor Frankl, isn't it? He said, he wrote Man's Search for Meaning after being in a concentration camp. And he said, in between the the something spoken and the response is an opportunity for a pause in which lies all of your power. Totally paraphrasing that. There you go. If you think transactional analysis could help your organization, do something with that, and that will help you to get in touch with Gemma about this.
That's it. So that just basically will take you through to a link so you can book a coffee with me, and we can chat more. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Lucy, for coming and giving that absolutely fantastic talk. And thank you so much, everybody who has attended. It's been brilliant seeing you all. And yeah, if you want to find out any more, either about Lucy's courses or how we might be able to help within your organisations, please just get in touch. But otherwise, see you soon.